So,
How are you, buddy?
good.
Good to see you. It's 101 already.
I lost you again. What happened? I gotta quit pushing buttons because I keep losing you.
So we made this deal up. Are we ready to go? Kaylin, should we are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
If you guys got anything to talk about at any time, we'll just deal with it. But we made this class up because of what we've always heard, not just what's relevant today, but what we've always dealt with. It just seems like an ongoing battle in whatever market you're with, and there's people that do really good jobs of it. For me, I fell down for a long time with my feedback with sellers, but we put seller feedback because it means so many different things. And so we're going to try to touch on a few of those, but I want you guys to take it wherever you want to go. So go ahead, Caitlin. Kaylin. Called you Caitlin. That was bad. By the way, I call my own sons different names, so don't ever be offended by that. I'm starting to do that stuff more and more often. It's a bad deal. A coach told me this a long time ago, and I think it's so true. It's the disconnect of what happens between a seller and an agent. So what happens is agents, sometimes we get enamored with getting the listing signed, and we should get the listing signed. But what happens during that first period of time is that we focus more on that instead of telling them. And this is what momentum teaches, to talk about your value. When we don't talk about what happens after they sign the listing, they don't know what to expect. And so when the ticker starts, they're already thinking you're not doing anything. And if we don't continue to communicate, that keeps going on and on and on, and they don't know what to expect about the process of feedback. And so during, it doesn't take long where, you were in a honeymoon when you were at the listing presentation. The listing was signed and everybody was really, really happy. But then all of a sudden you're at a point where you're hoping you don't run into them in the store. The way the coach described it to me is that the seller is sitting there thinking, this is obviously for one that's not getting activity. The seller is thinking, why hasn't the agent called? And the agent is thinking, I don't really have anything to tell them. I don't want to call them. And so the relationship just starts to deteriorate. And man, that was me. And I would lose so many listings at 6 months. It was terrible. When we went through 2010 and all of you guys were through that low period in the market, so you all know what I mean. I think that forced us all to have to get a little better with communicating because our listings were on the market for a long time. Would you agree with that? But, I think that there's still there's always a way to improve the process in which you're communicating so that you can set up a better expectation, create a better relationship, get your price reductions when you need them, or at least compel the seller or challenge the seller to not be able to ignore those price reductions like we're going to talk about. The other part of it is, of course, what we're all dealing with is when multiple offers come in within the first few days of the listings, we know that if we don't talk about that during the first chance we can, which is during the listing conversation, then they're automatically going to think that you don't have any market into it. You haven't put any time into my listing. So, Bruce, if you could just reduce your commission because, we got the offer right out of the gate. you know, you don't have a cost in it. If you just reduce it, that'd be great. Whereas if you start with that conversation, at least you can limit some of those conversations. So that's why the thought or the need for a class like this was talked about. And that's what we tried to put it together on. Any comments or thoughts about those comments? And by the way, this might be a real short class, and we're okay with that. If it's a half an hour, that's great. We just want to run through it. But
Jeff, don't you think right now, the way the market is so crazy that, I mean, it's hard to even do comps. You kind of have to just look and see and guess. And I mean, I tell my people when I'm putting it on the market right now, I said, if we don't get an offer in a week, we need to do something.
Yeah. No, I think that that's exactly the case, but we are, you know, I do still see listings that people, you know, it's obvious that they're not priced right because they're not getting activity. And meanwhile, those sellers think, why, you know, they automatically blame the agent because they're not getting activity or offers, or maybe they're getting activity and not offers. They automatically blame the agent. And if it's not set up right, no matter what, you know, if you didn't say that right out of the gate, like you just mentioned, hey, if we don't have activity in this long, this is what this means. Then it's hard to go backwards because all of a sudden it becomes a fault of the agent, not a fault of the market. And that's a problem, you know. And I think that that can be addressed in that first meeting if we take the time to do it.
Yeah, I don't have any $1 million listings or any of that kind of crazy stuff, but I saw it's like almost a $200,000 price reduction.
Yeah. You know,
Isn't that a little crazy?
Hey, all the talk that we talk about, you know, everybody likes to talk about all the stuff that is selling, but there's a fair amount of it that's sitting out there too that could sell, but still needs to be, you know, positioned accordingly. They need price change. If it's off the mark enough or in that right property type or area that it's just not going to get it done, you know, there's still stuff out there that needs that help. Hey, K Money. I love that.
Hey, I'm trying to figure out how to turn my damn video on.
It's the little camera on
There
the
we
left.
go.
There you go.
Hey, this really funny is Bill Allen on our team tells me, I call him the other day and he goes, hey, K Money. And he changed your contact in my phone to K Money. I figured I'd know who it was better. So I was like, now that is funny.
Kyle, you started your own personal brand without even trying.
I'm
Hey,
telling
Money.
you.
I just want to beat my chest, you know.
I know. Well, I
Money.
typed it in. I didn't even know it was going to show up. It said enter, you know, a username when Corona time started. And so I'm like, oh, K Money for sure. And then not knowing that it was going to show up. So anyway,
I've told this story before, but just a second. My buddy's a teacher. We just went on a little trip together. He tells me the very best story when they started Zoom classes with his class. One of the kids named their self Reconnecting. And then they would blank out the screen and it would say Reconnecting. And it took him a little bit to catch on. But I thought that was brilliant. All right. Okay. So we're going to try to break down just talk about some ideas about communicating with sellers. And I think, you know, basically you have to come up with your own style and your own process of how you're going to communicate, what method, how often, and what tools to use in the aid of the process. So I would like to know from you guys, how do you communicate currently with your sellers and what works for you?
I call
Me too.
Do you have a process, Jeff? Or was that Jeff or Bruce? I don't know which one.
them. It's
Do
Bruce.
you have do you call on a certain day or do you do it once a week or?
I set it up in my phone as a reminder. And when I leave the listing, you know, I've had that conversation with them that if we don't get a bite in a week, then I'm going to be calling them and we're going to be doing a price adjustment. And so I set it up in my reminders for a week out, give them a buzz.
That is awesome.
That way,
I'll
if
just
you
reach out to
know
Mike.
no offers, you still need to do something.
I'm good about calling them and just say, I don't really have anything to tell you, but I'm calling to tell you I don't know anything, and just be real honest and sincere. And like, we do the online activity report. I always email that out every Monday or Tuesday when it comes through. It shows them what activity they're getting online. That seems to resonate pretty good too.
We're going to share, and I've got one of those that I added onto the screen, but I love that part. I call them just to tell them I don't have anything to tell them.
Right.
That's what that coach hammered me on. And he said, we ought to be doing that with all of our sellers every week. That was his opinion. You have to call your sellers every week. And he said, you have to call all your buyers that you feel as though you have a, I don't know what his number was. I think it was an 80% or better chance of selling something to them in the next 3 to 6 months. You have to call them every week, even when you don't have anything to tell them. Because if you don't, they're thinking, why didn't they call me?
Okay.
I wonder why I haven't heard from him. You're thinking, the agent sometimes is thinking, I don't have anything to show them. Or on a seller, I don't have anything to tell him. But they're thinking, wonder why he didn't call me. So I think those are real good ways to start the thought of this. Scheduling it is huge. And then, sticking with it, even if you don't have anything to tell them. Jeff, when you said you use the seller's report, we've got that as a part of this, because I think there are tools that we could add to the process. We could add it to the call that we take for granted and that they don't know about, that we could use to soften that conversation or give us some supporting stuff to talk about what we need to talk about with different sellers. And I want to make sure that that's brought up, because I've seen lots of our agents do that, and I think it's really smart. So anybody want to add anything else about this page, or any questions or thoughts about it?
Hey, Jeff, on feedback from other agents when they go out and look at your stuff, are there brokerages here at the lake that just absolutely won't respond, that won't fill them out, or is that their thing?
So that's a slide on here too, Bruce. And I think that is just like you conditioning a person for their lack of activity. I condition them about the percentage of feedback we'll never get. And I set the agents up who don't give it, not in a good way. So what I mean is, if you were the seller and I was sitting down with you, I would say, Bruce, now here's what we do. So every time well, I'll tell you what, when we get to that point, we'll go over it.
All right.
But it's something I think is very key. I don't know why certain people don't give feedback. Sometimes it's just because they're, busy or whatnot. Some people just don't do it, but I think most people do. But
One of the things that irks me, there's some agents, I won't say their name, but they actually put their brand in the feedback. Have you seen that?
Huh.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
Happened.
Where like they're promoting themselves to my seller because they're giving this feedback, and they put their brokerage and their name and all.
tricky. Tricky.
Yeah.
So, well, when we talk about that feedback, don't forget, I want to bring up a couple things. Go ahead, Josie.
My problem I'm having with staying in touch with my buyers and sellers is I'm just so busy, and I've got 2 part-time people that are in and out each week. Is it advisable to ask them to touch base with them? I'm not even sure if they can. I think they can if they don't say certain things.
You bet they can. There is a lot of ways to skin the cat. We can figure out whatever system works for you. And I think it all revolves around how you set it up. So how you set it up when you're first there with them is the key to the success of however you follow up with them.
Okay.
So Josie, I want to learn about your expectations with feedback. I want you to tell me what you've been through before, when you sold houses before, what you liked and disliked, that type of conversation. But yes, the short answer is yes, you can definitely set up a system where you're automating your feedback, or you're getting help with staying in contact. So let's go to the next slide, because we're going to talk about some of that stuff. So Jeff alluded to the weekly showing reports, right? Sellers reports. Does everybody use those? If you don't,
I do.
okay. If you don't use those, I am to the point where I will not endorse Lead Street anymore. But that part of Lead Street is really good, and all it takes is for you to put your clients into the Lead Street system and check a box, and it will generate an automatic report that goes out Monday mornings really early, and it will have on there listing traffic summary, last week, last month, and since listed, those 3 different columns. It will have a category that says view similar properties, and you can adjust the map to bring in to have it search properties that you want it to search. It has a market summary active, market summary pending. So it'll send them, based upon the similar properties, it'll send them the ones that went pending. And then it'll talk about the activity types and their definitions. So using that report, you could, in your first presentation with them, Josie, you could say, you know, I always talk about expectations with sellers. I want you to know how I'm going to communicate with you. We are crazy busy, and the most important thing I can do is be converting leads on your listing and building my client database, so I have more opportunity to try and sell your property, and working with the other agents that have buyers. But to keep you in the loop of what's going on, I'm going to set you up on an automatic weekly report. Now you're going to get this, and I'm going to get this, but you might see it before I do. And it's going to show you it's going to show you our internet traffic in the last week, month, and since we're listed. It's going to show you similar properties that come on the market. It's going to show you active and pending. So if the properties that you're comparing to, if there's any of those that go under contract, you're going to see it. And it'll show you, you know, it'll show you that ongoing every week, so that if you see something, or you see something that goes on the under contract, we can talk about that. And we can brainstorm about why it went under contract. Maybe it was priced better, you know, whatever the reason. I want us to be a team, and you're going to get this report every Monday morning. So I want you to look for it. Does that make sense?
And where do you go to initiate this report?
Okay, so that is a Lead Street report. It's a seller's report.
Okay.
So you have to log into your Lead Street. You have to put that person in, that seller in, as a client. You set them up as a client, and then from that point on, it's literally a check of the button. Kaylin, do we have training on that, or can we offer help with that? Like something that we can.
Well, the only training that we really have for Lead Street, I mean, I can mess around with it and see what steps I can come up with, but I know that Lead Street, I have some videos from Lead Street on how to do that as well that we can send out.
I know we have a video on it that we can send you. It's not, Jeff, you use those?
I don't. I'm spoiled. I mean, Penny sets it up when she does our
Okay.
listing, so
Okay.
you know, I'm kind of spoiled because I'm on a team. But the one thing I do, I get it every week, and then I forward it. I send it to my clients, my sellers, and say, hey, make sure you got this. Looks like we're having some good activity online, you know, and try and just, I'm missing it to them a second time. They probably get it automatically, but I added my own comments every week to it on top of
Okay,
it.
so that's where I'm going next. A lot of agents do that, and I think that's a great way to solicit conversations, or to you know, you can do a blanket letter, or you can do a personal, you know, some notes on a personal when you're sending this out a second time, you can say, hey, our report went out Monday morning. I wanted to point out to you that blah, 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 blah. I've attached a letter on the next page that is an example of one that Susan did. Can you hit that, Kaylin? Thank you. And all she did was put a report to it. Now, keep in mind, she sent this out to every one of her sellers. And it just says, basically, it reiterates what should be said in the first presentation. If a property comes on the market, this is where Bruce was going, and the buyers don't deem it in the right place, and the buyers deem it in the right place, we're getting multiple offers within a week or less, and properties are often selling for over asking price. We're seeing the higher sales price. I mean, you guys can read it. And she goes on to say, if your property has been listed for longer than 30 days, and it's had several good showings but no offers, that's a signal to us that it's time to reduce the price, because every property should have sold by now. Pretty strong stuff. This, to me, is a great way to do it. And we have done this, piggybacking a weekly sellers report is a great way to instill that message. To me, a seller, you have to say it at the presentation, and then you have to reiterate it, because they will go into like this denial period if their property isn't selling and wanting to find some other reason. So we need to keep helping them remember that price, there's only two reasons a property sells or doesn't sell: price and exposure. You're already taking care of one of them. It's got to be the other one. I don't know how many times I still have conversations. Why do you think this property hasn't sold? Price. Well, it's probably not price. I mean, that thing is, it is so nice. I sold it to them. It is so nice. No, it's price. Well, how do you know that? Why? You know that. You all know that. I never forget when Sam Rhodes was here. The one thing I took away from him is he would like corner me, and he'd go, you know the real reason. Say it. Tell me the real reason. It's price. Say it. And Josie and I have had conversations with clients that we love and that we go way back with, and it's very easy for an agent to get to the point where they believe it might not be price, but it's always price. If it's been exposed, and if it's been listed for any period of time, it's been exposed. So sometimes it's very hard to say that on the phone with clients. I personally have a hard time with somebody that I really like being as direct as I should be. What I found really works is putting it in writing, either tagging it to a report or drafting a letter that's more specific to them, but actually putting it in writing where it's going to cause them to have a conversation with me. And then I can't chicken out of saying it on the phone. I'm serious, Jeff. We had a big meeting about it one time. It was a different market, I mean, we had lots and lots of properties that weren't selling because of price. And so we had a meeting, and we all decided that this one, and this one was overpriced. We wrote individual letters, or we had a letter, that we wrote up and that we customized to each person and mailed it, so we couldn't chicken out.
And it gives them time to think about it too, if you do it that
did,
way, right?
And it caused us to, force the conversation. People deserve to know, if we know.
Can you send us a copy of this letter?
You will have this presentation, yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Any questions, any comments about that?
Those are hard conversations to have.
I'm bad because if I've sold you 2 or 3 things and we go way back, and I'll dance around it, but sometimes I won't say what's really needed.
Yeah.
I'm good at the presentation, but the further the relationship goes and I haven't sold it, the more this black cloud of responsibility collects over my head, And I feel like I'm supposed to be the person that should be able to control that when we're not. We cannot control the market. And that responsibility causes a problem because some people are really good at it, but I've always had to have help. So we good?
Yeah.
Okay. So, when you get feedback, here we go, Bruce. And the first thing is, how do you explain it? I didn't put that on there, but I think in the very beginning, I put this on there backwards. I did this presentation backwards, I think. That last thing, help your sellers understand what feedback or lack of feedback really means. I think that should be done with the first time we talk to them, preferably after the listing signed, because I do think there's a level of salesmanship or salespersonship, however you say that, today that we can't let go of because we have to get the listing signed. But then after that, I think we need to take our time and make sure that people understand, hey, here's what's going to happen. When an agent schedules a showing, they're going to have to call in. At that point, I have the opportunity, and I used to tell people, no listing is set up without it being appointment only. They have to call because I want to know who's going in there and when they're going in. Even if you're not going to be here, even if it's vacant, I want to know because I'm going to call them, and it gives me an opportunity to help them understand what we've got to sell. Some will let me really take a part in their showing and some won't. I think that delivers value to the seller. And I think it's true that we have to be involved in that to help agents, to help out agents and make sure they know that, hey, this is going to be an easy deal. You want to sell my listing. So I told the sellers that, and then I would tell them, after we schedule the showing, you're going to have an opportunity to know when they're going. After it's scheduled, this system that we have is going to automatically send them a request for feedback. Now, you're likely not going to get the feedback the same day. Why? Because they're showing a dozen places. And sometimes they just won't have time. Sometimes it takes them time to sort out what properties they have shown that day, and what the comments that the buyers were. Some agents are fast, some agents are not. So I'll tell you what, we're going to send it out more than once. And our particular system in the office was we would send that feedback 3 times. And so I tell the sellers that we're going to send a request 3 times. If we do not get it, they're out. We're going to count that as their feedback. We didn't get it. And I want you to look at this as a numbers game because that's how I look at it. I want you to look at it as if they didn't send it back, and you might say, well, after the 3rd time, I'm going to call them. And if they don't give me verbal feedback over the phone, I'm done with them. I'm not going to call them anymore. And I'm going to consider that our feedback. So, I'm covering that ahead of time, and then I would add to it, you're only going to have to worry about that about 25% of the time. 75% of all the feedback we send out, we're going to get written feedback from. Bruce, does that go to what you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I don't know. I always call them.
Okay.
And half the time, it doesn't make any difference. Half the time, they won't call me back, and it just pisses me off. I just want to go over to their office and drag them out in the parking lot and shake them around a little bit.
Yeah. So don't even worry about it. If you set it up like that to your sellers, when they see who doesn't give them feedback, they'll remember.
Yeah. And it's funny because I know the agents that give good feedback, realistically usable feedback. And that's super nice. I always know when they're going to go show one of my properties, I know I'm going to get something back that's usable.
Yeah, I think it's professional courtesy, and I'm a big advocate of it. I think we should all do it for each other. But I don't spend any time worrying about the people who don't do it either. I just tell the sellers, if somebody doesn't care enough to send us feedback, well, that must be an indication of how they run their business.
Yeah.
I like to send mine straight too,
Okay.
instead of the manipulating, because, and I tell my people right up front, you may not like what they say, but you're a seller and they're a buyer. So but that way, I'm not altering what's being said.
Yep. So 2 schools of thought on that, Josie, and I have heard all of it. I mean, I've heard both, and I don't, different people do different things. I would say the same thing to the sellers when I did. I'd say, here's what's going to happen. Whenever we get that feedback, I'm going to turn around and send it to you. I don't want you to be offended by one person that says they don't like your house. The people you need to be offended by are the people that came and show and they don't want to buy it. The people who took the time, or that not came and shown. The people that don't even come and show. The people that come and show and look at it, at least give them the credit. And don't be offended by it if they say something bad or they say they didn't like it, because it's a numbers game. Remember, we got to generate enough activity to get you results. Look at it as a group. Now, if a whole group of them, and that's when I would go into the script that, we have a real advantage. The real advantage is that we get to see feedback on 35 or 40% of all the active listings on the market. And so we know that on average, it takes 8 showings to generate an accepted offer. And so when you're talking about feedback on your specific home, what I want you to focus on is if we get 6, 7, 8 showings and we don't have an offer, no matter what they write on that piece of paper, they're telling us the same thing. You know what they're telling us?
Too damn high.
They're telling us that they don't perceive enough value in your listing compared to the others to write an offer. It doesn't mean the driveway is too steep. It doesn't mean the water's too shallow, or they don't like your floor plan, or they don't like the color of your carpet. It means we didn't compare enough to the other property. They bought something else. They didn't see enough value in our listing to write an offer. Something like that. Some kind of script like that goes with it, Josie, but I didn't manipulate either. Now, I'll tell you, I do think what Jeff said is important. If people are putting things that are unprofessional or they shouldn't be on the feedback, I think that should be eliminated and not shared. And I'm guilty of not paying enough attention with that. But, before you publish them, you might take a peek at them.
Yeah, I always
Do you
review
set
it.
them up to always come to you first, or do you set them up to go to the seller too at the same time?
So they have to be published, but
Yeah.
so that's what we do. But Carrie, so as our system goes, the feedback comes in and she just looks at it briefly and then sends it on.
In our
But
case,
even-
we review it first, and most of us will publish it unedited. Every now and then I'll bleep something out, but
Yeah,
we
so
like to see it first.
we do too. And it's funny, even in this team, there are different levels of, I try to make sure the agent doesn't become too involved with manipulating them.
Yeah.
Because it's okay for people to hear that it smells.
Some of that you want to, that's when
If
I
it
give feedback.
smells.
That's my opportunity to talk to that seller pretty much directly, right?
I think so too.
And
And
so-
it's so funny that we've had some great agents that are very caring people, and that caring crosses over the line. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden they start crossing out things that the seller should really deal with. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So, because that's really valuable. That feedback is really valuable.
Well, I have a recent bad experience where I've been trying to get this listing in my neighborhood for 4 years. Been working with this lady, helping them out. Her husband had died. And I took the team through last year. The house needs some work. Popcorn ceilings, need flooring, paint, yada, yada, yada. But she called me last week, literally in tears, because I'd done so much for them over the years to tell me that she wasn't going to list with me. And I'm like, this is not worth stressing over. If you know, I understand this is a business, but I'm like, Sandy, why are you so upset? And she goes, I didn't like the feedback your team gave me last year during your team tour. Oh, and that was on me. And I told the team that. I'm like, you know, I didn't do a good enough job of packing this house. They'd held in this house 20 years. There's a lot of emotions. Their kids have grown up in it. And I didn't do a good job of massaging that feedback in a way that came across more positive. And well, that was a hard lesson for me to learn.
Boy, you just hit me right between the eyes.
Oh, it hit me hard. I mean, I was like,
Let me tell you, that's one of my pet peeves, and you can ask anybody on this team because I get downright ornery.
well, what bothered me is she was so distraught. And then,
Well, but here's what we do. Here's what we do on this team, on our team. And I think agents are really, I think this can happen all over, but we get kind of catty and kind of snotty about listings when we shouldn't. And we get to the point where we think we know everything, and that translates into feedback that shouldn't be written, like this house will never sell for this, or it's way too much overpriced. Well, we just had one a couple weeks ago that, so we have made a pact that we will be nice to each other on our feedback, and that we're going to try to work on being verbally nice to each other as well. But I think what you said is so important because people take that stuff really seriously. They get offended and hurt.
right. Well, and you know, and Jane's really good at one of these things. She's so good about starting with the positive on one.
Diplomatic, yeah.
And then, you know, you tell them all the great things about their property, and then you come back with, here's the things buyers are going to struggle with. And then she lays out, you know, rather, again, she does a very good job. But I had just kind of taken this one for granted that, you know, I'd done so much for the family and they knew me, and I figured whenever they're ready, I'll get the listing. So and they priced it $80,000 higher than I would have probably listed it. That was that. But anyway.
Well, can I parlay that into something else?
Sure.
I think that when we're sending out feedback on other people's listings, we need to do the same thing. If you really feel like it's something constructive that will help the person, then you know, help the agent or help the seller. We need to be as diplomatic, empathetic, write that as best we can. And if it's something that is not worth saying, don't say it, because it's going to be used by a good agent. You're going to be used as the lever to reduce the price. So you can work your way into listings by feedback in a professional manner, or you can work your way out of listings by feedback in an unprofessional manner. I have had a lot of sellers tell me, I will never, ever use this person. I've had people say, I don't want them coming back in my house because of the way they wrote their feedback.
Right.
And it's like, whoa, you gotta take it easy. They're not thinking about that. You don't want to, we're not going to stop somebody from showing your property. They're just not thinking about it. But I mean, you hit the nail on the head. People put a lot of emotion into that.
It's
crazy. It's interesting.
Well, I always say that some of the hardest lessons are the ones you learn the best, right? So
For sure. That's the ones we remember. So there are some common statements that I think would be worth a conversation about, because I think that if we can overcome them or find ways to help with overcoming them, you know, how about this one? Why would we reduce the price if we haven't had any showings? How do you guys deal with that?
I usually say there's 3 factors as to why it's not showing, usually price, condition, and location. And so let's narrow it down. What do you think it is?
That's good.
Then we see where the conversation goes from there.
Any other thoughts about that?
I always just go back to that first conversation that we have. I just flat out tell them. I mean, I don't sugarcoat it a whole lot. I just tell them, I say, if it doesn't sell, to me, or especially in this market, I mean, I've looked at some totally nasty crap that's 300,000 on lakefront that you just think you ought to just burn it and start over, and they're getting 300 grand for it. But if you got a showing and it's not getting any offers or any showings, it's because the dang thing's too priced out of the market.
The only thing I would challenge on that, Bruce, is there are some price points or property types maybe that you can anticipate a longer shelf life.
It's
on.
like a lake lot's going to take longer to sell than, lakefront. So.
Yeah, but I do the same thing that you were talking about. What I would try to do is to hit that ahead of time. And when I'm describing about showings, a lot of people I started that wrong. This is why would we reduce if we hadn't had any showings? And so the conversation could go like this. Here's what happens. So the world we live in today, the day that I'm going to do all this pre-listing work so that it's packaged perfectly when it hits the market. Because the day it hits the market, you know what? All the buyers that are currently looking at Lake of the Ozarks are going to see it immediately. And they're going to be sitting on their couch or in their office or looking at it on their phone. And without ever talking to the agent that they're working with, they're going to be able to form their own perception of value. And that's going to cause one of a couple different reactions. One, they're going to think it's great and they're going to call their agent and schedule a showing. Two, maybe we'll see that they opened the virtual tour and they saved it as a favorite. We'll be able to see that online. They may not schedule a showing right away, but maybe it'll be kind of in queue for their next. Or they're going to just pass us up. If they pass us up, it's going to be because they don't perceive enough value in the listing to look at it personally. They looked at it online and they're not going to schedule a showing. So bottom line is, if we don't have any showings, that does tell us something. No showings is not an indication of no feedback. No showings is an indication of, holy cow, we're not even in the game. We didn't even get up to the plate. We're not getting an at-bat. So you're going to hear that from me if that happens. Now, if we get some showings, not enough, not like that 8 that we know it takes on average to generate an accepted contract. If we get 3 or 4 and then it dies off, I'm going to talk to you about that too, because that means we're closer, but we're probably not getting, they're not perceived. They thought we were good enough to look at, but they're not thinking that we compete well enough to write an offer. Does that make sense? Yep. And if we get 10 showings, we know we're really close. I would start out with kind of a scenario like that so that I set myself up for the people that didn't get activity and aren't getting showings. I can kind of, like you said, I can kind of reference back to it, Bruce. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I said the same thing twice. I won't change my price until I get some showings. What I meant to say on that was, I will not reduce until I get an offer. Because that's what they say too. Well, I ain't going to reduce my price until somebody makes me an offer. Why would I do that? Well, you're not going to get an offer. It's all the same. I use the same type of script to answer all the same questions on those two at least, because you're not in the game. Remember the first time we talked about this, Jeff? When we don't get showings, it's not that we're not getting feedback. We are getting feedback. They're telling us something because everybody that's looking is seeing it. Because I can't cause your property to get an offer, but what I can do is expose your property to everyone that's looking currently. And I have done that. And I can show you the traffic. So it's exposed, but they're not accepting it. And so you kind of have something to fall back on. And I think even in today's market, boy, if we don't take the time to have that conversation up front, we're really costing ourselves with those that don't get that crazy activity right out of the gate. I beat this slide up really bad. You guys got anything else on this? Is this okay? What I have next? We talked about as early as possible setting proper expectations. One of the things I love is ask them how they prefer to communicate. That's when you get permission. And some people, it might be great to text, but if you don't ask them that, and you just start texting, they're going to blame you for not calling them later. Some people, they might say, well, I would like to be called after every showing. But when they said that, I poo-pooed that. Josie, you started with a question about automating your communication. So what I did was I knew that I was not going to call these people all the time like I should be. So I would talk a lot about the automated sellers report. I talk a lot about being a team. I would talk a lot with them and me. If something on the sellers report really caused a question about another property that went under contract or a new listing that came out, I asked them to call me, because I got permission from them that we're a team. And then what we did was we put together the seller's report. I started sending individual videos to them. If I had something that I wanted them to specifically think about, and I didn't want to have to entertain a half-an-hour conversation, I would send an individual video to them. I'd say, hey, Bruce, I noticed there was a lot of activity today. I'm a little bit concerned because we haven't had a lot of specific activity on your property. If you're okay, I'm okay, but I want you to know that I'm a little bit concerned about that. If you want to talk about adjusting the price or changing the price, I want you to know that I'm ready to talk about that if you want to. He had to think about it. He couldn't tie me up for a long time, and I got out what I needed to say. I think individual videos to sellers are a really good way to do that. I also used BombBomb to create a list, an automatic campaign of videos that would go out to all of our sellers that reminded them about showing feedback, like some of the things that we talked about here, about what happens if you're not getting showings, about some of the things that we're doing behind the scenes and how we're promoting the property. And these just go out on a scheduled campaign. And they're kind of old now, but if any of you want them, you just can't make fun of the way I look or the way I sound. But Carrie will set you up on them so you can see those videos, and they worked great. And I mean, people really felt like you were, I did them all at one time, and then she was sending them out on a campaign, and obviously you got to keep up with that campaign. But boy, it's an easy way to stay in front of your sellers. And they take videos as a personal, they really liked them. So that was a way, Josie, to automate some of that follow-up.
Okay.
Good idea.
So you actually sat down and made I'm making notes while we're talking, but you sat down and made all of your campaigns at once. And
yep, I brought in about 6 different shirts, and we've done it twice, and I knocked out all of them at one time, stood in different places, sometimes sitting down, sometimes standing up, try to make them different. But just, we had all the topics laid out, and we kind of decided this would be sent out on day 5. This would be sent out on day 8. This would be, if it goes pending, you stop that campaign.
And did you send the same campaign to each of your listings, or just
Yep.
select listings?
Nope, all listings. And I sent it, I actually told the team members that that they could do their own videos and that we would help, but nobody wanted to at first. So I just said, well, then all your sellers are going to get mine, because we have to stay in touch with these people. And I would just refer back to the team member or to the team in general on the video. And people didn't take offense to it, but several of our team members have created their own now. I saw Jeff smirk a little bit. I can't see. Okay, Money's making a face right now, but I can't see his face. So, but anyway, I just think that communication is super important. I mean, it's a lot easier to reduce a listing you have than to lose, than to lose one. So those listings are worth too much money to lose. So finally, we've been burned personally on this by getting so fast that we don't cover the question of how would you feel if you receive a contract within the first few days. That is not the same as seller feedback, but it's so important in today's market. So we have to address that question. And I hope that you guys do, because there's no super secret sauce to that question other than asking it. So you ask it when you're with a seller, and some of them will respond, well, we priced it too low. Some of them will respond, I'd be tickled. Whatever the case, you have to explain to them how long that you and your fellow realtors have had your buyers in pool, and what the incubation period is, and why lots of the work that you do to present it properly will cause the best offers to come first. And showing desk or showing time, whatever you call it, has a really neat back-end reporting system. And I know you guys have seen it because we send it out. And if you haven't, you need to please look at it. But it'll show you the value of the listing, the first week of the listing, the second week of the listing, and how that goes down as time goes. So it will kind of back up how the very best offers come right out of the gate. And it'll help you address this conversation, and that will stop people from saying, you've really not had this listing for very long. You don't have much in it. Let's reduce your commission. It'll at least combat that. And if you don't have that conversation, we're going to get hit with that more and more and more, I think.
I don't think I use showing time reports and what have you enough.
That
might be a good class, Kaylin.
Josie, they're so important. Like if you have if you have one of those properties, let's just pick on an area. Let's say area G, 600,000, and area G, 600,000 is a really active price range in other areas, but for whatever reason, area G, the $600,000 houses haven't got the amount of showings, offers, or sales. So you know that, but your seller doesn't know that. So you can print up a report that shows all area G showings versus the other areas, and it can show the decline of that area. Or it can also show a decline based upon price point in all areas. So if you have a whole lot of showings up to 400 in condos, but that $430,000 condo is not getting any showings, you can show them why, if they just got below this price point, it could really change their numbers of showings. And it's hard data. So sometimes it's really valuable.
Josie, I do have a note to do a couple videos on that too. So we'll create some training material and send it to you guys.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And it's not hard to pull, and you can pull it specifically if you want.
Jeff, the best client I ever had, I wrote a contract on her house, or listing contract on her house. I drove back home and she called me. I hadn't even listed it yet. She called me and she goes, hey, I got somebody who wants to buy my house. And so I'm thinking, I'm getting ready to get bent over, right? And she goes, nope, I'm still gonna pay your commission. And I mean, it was like 12 grand. I'm like,
Wow.
holy crap. Woo-hoo.
You need to write her some thank you cards. Send her some
I did
flowers.
do a little something for her.
Well, let me tell you the opposite story of that, which happened to Susan, who is she is just a really good listing agent, seller's agent. She just does a great job, works really hard at it. This was many years ago, but she had a goal that she wanted to up the level of professionalism in her database. So she wanted people specifically to think of her as the expert in the market. So one of the ways that we came up with for her to do that was through a series of videos where she was just demonstrating value, talking about what she does behind the scenes, talking about market data, talking about Lake, and it was just they were real little videos. So she did this for a while. It started working really well within her database. People started referring back to them. This one lady called her and said, "You don't know me, but I own 2 condos and I'm in your database and I've been getting these videos you've been doing. And my agent hasn't done anything for me and I'm taking them off the market and I'm listing them with you." Woohoo! What a great deal, right? She was so excited. She listed them both, rewrote the listings, repositioned put them in different price points, did Matterports and did different pictures and really positioned these things well, put them out there, got an offer on one immediately, did not cover the potential objection of what happens if it sells too fast. The lady who, remember, jumped ship from her previous agent, so she had that in her anyway, went right to Susan and said, "This sold too fast. You need to reduce your commission." And we had a hard time backpedaling because she used the leverage of the other listing on her, and it was a tough go. So that little script today is really important to address, because I think that people do assume that we don't do enough work if we haven't had it for very long sometimes. So anyway, I'm out of time already. I didn't mean to take a whole bunch of time from you guys, but I sure appreciate you, all of you, for coming and sharing and talking. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
you betcha.
Thank
Hope
you.
you guys have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
Gene.